The Loki who escaped. The Loki who escaped in Avengers Endgame. When the Avengers pulled off their time heist, Tony dropped the Tesseract during the chaos of the Battle of New York, and Loki wasted no time grabbing it and vanishing. This single moment splintered the timeline and created what we now know as the Variant. What's important to understand is that this Loki isn't the redeemed, more mature character we saw by the time of Thor Ragnarok. This is fresh off the Battle of New York Loki, still arrogant, still power-hungry, still carrying a chip on his shoulder about Thor and Odin. He hasn't gone through the growth or the sacrifices that the main MCU Loki experienced. When the TVA captured him, it stripped away his illusions of control. Suddenly, he's forced to confront who he really is, something he'd spent his whole life running from. The TVA literally plays back his entire life, including the path he would have taken, his mother's death, his fractured relationship with Thor, and his ultimate sacrifice at the hands of Thanos. It's a gut punch, both for Loki and the audience. This sets up the entire Loki series as a story of self-discovery. Instead of dying in Infinity War, this Loki gets a second chance, but at the cost of his freedom. He becomes the anchor point for the show and the lens through which we meet every other variant. Classic Loki. If there's one Loki who stole the spotlight in the Loki series, it's Classic Loki. Played brilliantly by Richard E. Grant, he's a direct nod to Loki's original comic book design: green tights, yellow horns, flamboyant cape. But beneath the campy exterior is arguably the most tragic Loki of them all. In his timeline, Classic Loki managed to survive past Thanos by doing what Loki does best: faking his death. His illusion was so flawless that even Thanos believed it, and he drifted into hiding on a faraway planet. But here's the twist: instead of returning to mischief, he lived in total solitude. For years, he stayed away from the universe, convinced that he only brought destruction to those he loved. That isolation is heartbreaking. It shows us what happens when Loki actually gives up the chase for power and glory. He's left with nothing. Eventually, loneliness drove him to try and rejoin society, but the TVA swooped in and pruned him for deviating from his intended path. His last stand in the void is one of the most iconic moments in the series. Classic Loki conjures an entire illusion of Asgard, massive and detailed, to distract the cosmic cloud. In that moment, he proves that Loki was always capable of greatness, not just trickery. His final words, "Glorious purpose," are more than just a catchphrase. They're the culmination of his entire tragic arc. A Loki who finally finds meaning in sacrifice. Kid Loki. Among all the variants in the void, Kid Loki might be the most dangerous. Why? Because in his timeline, he killed Thor. That one detail completely changes the dynamic. Think about it. His rivalry with Thor defines every Loki we've ever seen. But Kid Loki went all the way and ended his brother's story before it even began. This single act made him the ruler of the Void's Loki community. The other variants respected him, or feared him, because unlike them, he committed the ultimate betrayal and carried the weight of it. But what's fascinating about Kid Loki is that he doesn't flaunt his power. He's quieter, more withdrawn, almost haunted. He drinks out of a juice box while sitting on a throne made of scrap, which perfectly captures the paradox of his character. He's both a child and a king. Kid Loki also adds a symbolic layer to the show. He represents the idea that Loki's choices could be even darker than we've ever seen. If a child Loki was capable of killing Thor, then no version of the character is safe from corruption. At the same time, his presence hints at Marvel's possible setup for the Young Avengers. With characters like America Chavez and Wiccan appearing, Kid Loki fits neatly into that lineup. He may not have had as much screen time as Sylvie or Classic Loki, but his existence is chilling. He proves that under the right circumstances, Loki could have become something far more dangerous than a mischievous trickster. He could have been a godslayer. Boastful Loki. Boastful Loki is one of those characters you can't help but smirk at. He shows up in the void wielding a hammer, claiming that he defeated Captain America and Iron Man and even collected all 6 Infinity Stones. But here's the problem. He's Loki. And if there's one thing Loki is good at, it's lying. The beauty of Boastful Loki is that he reflects a core truth about all variants. They're unreliable narrators of their own stories. Each Loki believes they're destined for greatness, but the reality never quite lives up to the fantasy. For Boastful Loki, his hammer is a symbol of his delusion. It's not Mjolnir. It's a cobbled-together weapon that looks impressive, but doesn't hold the same power. What makes him entertaining is how seriously he takes himself. Surrounded by other Lokis who constantly betray each other, Boastful Loki tries to stand out by inflating his victories. It's classic Loki behavior turned up to 11. But his inclusion isn't just for laughs. He also highlights the theme of identity that runs through the Loki series. Each variant has to answer the question, what does it mean to be Loki? For some, it's tragedy. For others, mischief. For Boastful Loki, it's ego. And that ego inevitably leads to betrayal. Fitting for a character who represents the Loki archetype at its most exaggerated. President Loki. President Loki is straight out of the comics, but in the Loki series, he's more parody than politician. He shows up in the void leading an entire gang of Loki variants, wearing a torn suit and a campaign button that says, "Vote Loki." It's instantly ridiculous, but also strangely fitting. After all, who's better at making empty promises than Loki? The key to President Loki is betrayal. He promises to share power with his army, but within minutes, he tries to seize control for himself. And the punchline? His own soldiers turn on him just as quickly. It's a never-ending cycle of Lokis backstabbing each other, perfectly encapsulated in one chaotic scene. The fight that breaks out between the Lokis is both hilarious and revealing. It shows that no matter how many times Loki tries to lead, he always ends up sabotaging himself. Even in a world filled entirely with Lokis, he can't win. President Loki works as both comic relief and as commentary. He's a reminder that Loki's ambition often outweighs his ability to hold on to power. He may dream big, but his own nature, his ego, his deceit, always drags him down. That makes President Loki less of a variant with depth and more of a mirror held up to the flaws every Loki shares. Alligator Loki. Now we get to the wild card. At first, he seems like a joke, a literal alligator wearing Loki's iconic horned crown. But the genius of this variant is that he's treated seriously within the story. None of the other Lokis question his existence. They just accept that, yep, somewhere out there, Loki was born as an alligator. Alligator Loki is funny, but he's also strangely fitting. Loki has always been about transformation and mischief, and what's more mischievous than throwing an alligator into the mix? He doesn't speak, but his presence says everything. He snaps at hands, growls at enemies, and even mauls President Loki by biting his hand off, a scene that had fans cheering. Beyond the humor, Alligator Loki actually expands the multiverse concept. He proves that there are no limits to how wild variants can get. If Loki can exist as an alligator, then truly anything is possible in the MCU. Sylvie, the female Loki. Finally, we come to Sylvie, the most important variant of them all. Unlike the others, she doesn't even like being called Loki. Taken by the TVA as a child, she spent her entire life running through different apocalypses, never able to settle, never able to trust anyone. Her story is one of survival and vengeance. What sets Sylvie apart is her determination. Where our Loki schemes for power, Sylvie is driven by revenge. She doesn't want a throne, she wants freedom. She doesn't crave recognition, she craves justice. That difference makes her both a mirror and a contrast to the Loki we know. Her relationship with Loki becomes the emotional core of the series. It's controversial, even bizarre, two versions of the same person falling for each other. But it works because it forces Loki to confront himself. For the first time, he sees what it's like to care about someone who shares his pain, his flaws, his chaos. Sylvie's biggest moment comes at the end of Season 1, when she kills He Who Remains. In that single act, she unleashes the multiverse and sets the stage for Marvel's entire next saga. It's a choice driven by vengeance, not strategy, and it shows just how different she is from Loki. Sylvie proves that being a Loki doesn't mean being bound to one destiny, it means rewriting it. And in her case, it changed the entire MCU forever. The Loki montage. By now, we've seen Lokis who rule kingdoms, Lokis who sacrifice themselves, even Lokis who come in reptile form. But the Loki series makes one thing crystal clear. The possibilities are endless. And nothing drives that home better than the brief montage of variant cameos sprinkled throughout the show. When Loki first enters the void, he's surrounded by an army of himself. At first, it's funny, chaotic even. But the more you look, the more it feels like a window into how unpredictable this character truly is. We catch glimpses of Lokis who embrace their frost giant heritage, hulking brute versions who traded cunning for raw strength, and even absurd ones like Tour de France Loki, who apparently decided that mischief was best served on a bicycle. Individually, these variants are jokes, background details, blink and you'll miss it moments. But together, they represent something much bigger, Loki's core truth. He's the god of mischief because he can be anything, anywhere, at any time. He's a survivor. Drop him in Asgard, Midgard, or a professional cycling competition, and he'll find a way to win. or at least trick everyone into thinking he did. The original MCU Loki. To fully appreciate the chaos of Loki's variants, we have to circle back to the one who started it all, the Loki we followed across the MCU's main timeline, from Thor in 2011 all the way to his death in Infinity War. This Loki begins as the bitter younger brother, desperate for Odin's approval and resentful of Thor's destined throne. In Thor, he discovers the truth about his frost giant heritage, a revelation that shatters his identity. Feeling betrayed, he lashes out, staging an attack on Jotunheim and ultimately falling into the abyss of space, setting him on a path of villainy. By the time of the Avengers, he's fully embraced mischief, leading the Chitauri invasion of New York with the Mind Stone in hand. To the world, he becomes the villain. But even here, you can see glimpses of something deeper. A god who doesn't just want power, he wants to be seen, validated, loved. Across Thor the Dark World and Thor Ragnarok, we watch that mask start to crack. His grief over Frigga's death, his uneasy alliance with Thor, and his eventual role in saving Asgard all chip away at the facade. Loki is still selfish, still conniving, but he's also learning what it means to be more. And then comes Infinity War. In his final moments, Loki stands before Thanos. For once, he doesn't run, doesn't trick, doesn't scheme. He tries to save Thor, and he pays with his life. This Loki's arc matters because it gives all the variants their weight. Without his journey of betrayal, loss, and redemption, we wouldn't care about Classic Loki's sacrifice, Sylvie's revenge, or even Alligator Loki's chaos. The original Loki gave the character a soul, and that soul lives on in every variant we've met since.